Most Americans never buy diesel. They do not stop at diesel pumps. They do not run freight companies. They do not manage warehouses, shipping routes, or refrigerated trucks. But diesel may already be built into the price of much of what they buy. It helps move food to stores. It helps power farm equipment. It supports delivery routes, distribution centers, and the long transportation network between where food is produced and where families shop. That is why diesel matters beyond truck stops. When diesel prices rise, the pressure does not stay on the highway. It can move through freight bills, grocery aisles, small business costs, and household budgets. By the time that pressure reaches the average family, it may no longer look like a fuel problem. It looks like a grocery receipt. It looks like a more expensive trip to the store. It looks like the same cart costing more than it used to. As of June 1st, 2026, the U.S. on-highway diesel price stood at $5.35 per gallon, according to the Energy Information Administration. That was $1.89 higher than 1 year earlier. In California, the number was higher still, $7.05 per gallon on the same date. Those numbers matter because diesel is one of the working fuels of the American economy. The Energy Information Administration notes that diesel powers freight trucks, delivery trucks, trains, buses, boats, farm vehicles, construction vehicles, and generators. In practical terms, diesel helps move the physical economy. It moves goods before consumers ever see them. It helps move food before that food becomes a grocery bill. It powers parts of the machinery and transportation network that sit behind everyday prices. That does not mean diesel alone explains grocery inflation. Food prices are shaped by many forces: labor, packaging, processing, storage, retail margins, weather, demand, and energy all play a role. Diesel is one cost inside that larger system. But when diesel rises sharply, it can add pressure to a supply chain that is already expensive. The grocery store is the final stop. The cost journey begins much earlier. Food starts on a farm. From there, it moves through harvesting, packing, processing, cold storage, long-haul trucking, warehousing, regional distribution, and finally a store shelf. Each step carries costs. Each step requires labor. Many steps require energy. And several depend directly or indirectly on diesel. That is why diesel can matter to a household that has never owned a diesel vehicle. A carton of vegetables, a box of cereal, a frozen meal, or a bag of produce does not simply appear on the shelf. It arrives through a system, and that system has to be paid for. The U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index shows how that pressure was building in the first quarter of 2026. National shipment volume fell 0.3% quarter over quarter, but shipper spending rose 12.9% over the same period. Year over year, shipments rose just 0.6%, while shipper spending rose 21.8%. That gap is significant. It means freight costs were rising much faster than the amount of freight actually moving through the system. Companies were paying more to move goods, even though shipment volume was nearly flat. Bob Costello of the American Trucking Associations said the market was being reshaped by supply conditions, not demand. Bobby Holland of U.S. Bank observed that costs moved higher abruptly, even though freight activity itself had not surged. Those observations point to a cost pressure story, not simply a story of high demand. When demand surges, higher prices have a straightforward explanation: more activity. When costs rise while activity is modest, a different question emerges. What is making the system more expensive to operate? Consumers rarely see that pressure directly. A family does not receive a freight invoice when buying groceries. A fuel surcharge is not printed beside the price of lettuce, cereal, or milk. But businesses see those costs. Shippers see them. Carriers see them. Distributors see them. Retailers see them. Over time, some of that pressure is absorbed. Some is delayed. Some is negotiated. And some is passed along. It would be misleading to say every diesel increase immediately becomes a grocery increase. But it would be equally misleading to ignore diesel's role entirely. The more careful conclusion is that higher diesel can put sustained pressure on freight and food distribution costs. And when grocery prices are already elevated, that pressure carries weight. In April 2026, food-at-home prices were 2.9% higher than a year earlier. Fresh vegetables were up 11.5%. Fruits and vegetables overall were 6.1% higher. Energy prices were up 17.9%. Those numbers do not prove that diesel caused grocery inflation. They do show that households were absorbing higher food costs, while energy and freight costs were under pressure at the same time. For ordinary Americans, the combination is what matters. A household does not experience the economy as a set of separate charts. It experiences the economy as a monthly budget. Gas, groceries, utilities, insurance, rent, car costs, credit cards. Each category may have a different cause, but they all meet in the same place: the household budget. The United States food system is built on distance. Food is not always grown near where it is consumed. Fresh produce may travel hundreds or thousands of miles before reaching a store. Some products need refrigeration, some need fast delivery. Some move through multiple warehouses and distribution centers before reaching a shelf. USDA research found that fuel prices are a statistically significant factor in wholesale produce price margins, and that the effect is especially pronounced for produce shipped longer distances by truck. Fresh produce is one of the clearest examples of the diesel connection. Unlike some packaged foods, fresh fruits and vegetables often depend heavily on speed, refrigeration, and long-haul movement. When trucking becomes more expensive, that pressure tends to travel with the product. The impact is not automatic. Retailers may not raise prices immediately. Contracts can delay the effect. Some companies absorb part of the cost. Some products are affected more than others. But the exposure is real. Diesel begins as part of the energy market. It is refined from crude oil. According to the EIA, a 42-gallon barrel of crude oil produces roughly 11 to 12 gallons of diesel fuel. That connects diesel prices to crude oil markets, refinery operations, inventory levels, and regional supply conditions. Once diesel enters the economy, it becomes something more than a fuel product. It becomes an input cost. For a trucker, it is a daily operating expense. For a shipper, it becomes part of the transportation bill. For a distributor, it affects the cost of moving goods between warehouses and stores. For a grocery chain, it is one more variable inside a complicated pricing decision. For a family, it may appear only as a higher number on the shelf. That is the hidden path. Diesel to truck, truck to warehouse, warehouse to store, store to receipt, receipt to household budget. The cost begins in places most consumers never watch. It ends in places they cannot avoid. The USDA's food dollar framework makes this structure visible. The consumer food dollar is divided across many layers of the food system. Farming is only one part. Processing, packaging, transportation, wholesale trade, retail trade, energy, services, and labor all sit inside the final price a shopper pays. That changes how the grocery bill should be understood. It is not just a farm bill. It is not just a store bill. It is a supply chain receipt. And diesel is one of the costs hidden inside that receipt. For different groups of Americans, this pressure lands differently. For retirees on fixed incomes, grocery inflation can be difficult to absorb month to month. For families, it changes weekly routines and purchasing decisions. For workers, it can make each paycheck feel smaller even when wages are rising. For small businesses, higher delivery and supplier costs can narrow already thin margins. For truckers and carriers, elevated diesel raises operating stress directly. For retailers, the question becomes, how much cost can be absorbed before shelf prices have to move? For middle-class households specifically, this pressure can feel particularly difficult because there is limited control at the consumer level. A family can compare stores. It can switch brands. It can buy fewer expensive items. It can plan meals more carefully. But it cannot control diesel prices. It cannot control freight rates. It cannot control how far food travels before it arrives. It can only face the final number at the register. This is one of the harder features of modern inflation. The cause is often invisible. The cost is not. When prices rise at the store, people tend to look for one clear explanation. A company, a policy, a shortage, a single event. But the food system rarely works that simply. The shelf price is the result of many layers, many decisions, and many costs compounded across distance and time. Diesel is one of the forces hidden within that result. It rarely announces itself. It does not appear on grocery labels. It does not appear on most household budgets. But it shapes the cost of the system that produces and delivers the food those budgets have to cover. The current picture is cautious, but clear. Diesel remained significantly higher than a year earlier. Freight spending had risen sharply, far outpacing shipment volume. Food at home prices were still elevated. Fresh vegetables had increased well above overall food inflation. And the system connecting diesel, trucking, produce, and grocery costs remained under pressure. Several questions remain open. It is uncertain how long diesel prices will stay elevated. It is uncertain how much freight cost will be absorbed by businesses and how much will ultimately reach consumers. It is uncertain which products will feel the most pressure. It is uncertain whether grocery inflation will continue at the same pace. That is why careful language matters here. Diesel may raise pressure on grocery prices. Freight costs can add stress to household budgets. Transportation costs appear to be one contributing factor inside a larger, more complex food price system. The evidence does not support saying diesel alone is responsible for grocery inflation. That would be too simple and inaccurate. But the more careful story is also more useful. It shows how one hidden cost moves through the economy. It shows how a fuel most consumers never buy can still influence what they pay. It shows why a grocery bill is not just about the grocery store. The diesel cost reaches Americans through movement, through trucks, through warehouses, through distribution routes, through refrigerated trailers, through farm equipment, through supply chains that connect energy markets to dinner tables. By the time the cost arrives, it may no longer look like diesel. It may look like fresh vegetables. It may look like a delivery fee. It may look like another grocery bill that does not stretch as far as it used to. That is the hidden economic system behind the aisle. For ordinary Americans, the question is not whether they buy diesel. The question is, how much diesel is already built into the things they cannot stop buying?